Good morning. Good morning, and thank you to everyone throughout the Americas and here in the United States for participating in what will absolutely be a robust discussion. We have a fantastic panel of leaders throughout the Americas here with us today. And we are going to kick things off with the America's Liberty Caucus that we are calling TALC, with our first of many discussions. This obviously is our inaugural online video conference session, which will be followed up by in-person meetings later in the year. But before I go too far along that line, let me introduce to some and reintroduce to others Mr. Niger Innis. Mr. Innis is a human rights activist, an international human rights activist and commentator here in the United States. He's seen on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, so many news outlets I can't even count. He's such a familiar face. He has a long and a lineage of fighting for the rights of individuals, both domestically here in the United States and throughout the world. He is the host of our forum and caucus session for this morning. And with that, I will give it over to Mr. Niger Innis.
Thank you, Aaron, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the TALC conference. As Aaron said, my name is Niger Innis. I'm National Chairman of the Congress of Racial Equality and co-founder, along with Aaron Manaigo and Rick Figueroa, of MPAC. MPAC stands for Multicultural Political Action Conference. And that was a gathering in Washington, D.C., and continues to be a gathering of minorities that believe in individual rights and are patriots. It was, as I said before, it was co-founded by Aaron Manaigo, our host, by myself and Rick Figueroa. TALC is a natural evolution and outgrowth of MPAC. Whereas MPAC was based in the United States, TALC, which stands for the America's Liberty Caucus, is based and brings together patriots from throughout, patriots that believe in individual rights throughout this hemisphere. Today's conference is going to be a spectacular conference, bringing together leaders from Latin America, the Caribbean, and North America. It is going to cover the areas of national and regional security, because without national and regional security, you have chaos. It is going to cover the economy and trade amongst the nations in the Western Hemisphere, because with economy and trade, you have prosperity. And finally, it's going to cover freedom of religion. Freedom of religion, which is essentially the freedom to think your own ideas, to believe in your own religion, and to exercise those practices. That may be the concept that ties us all together, patriots all. I want to thank you for joining this conference today, and know that this conference is just the beginning. It is going to be followed with step 2, which will be an in-person conference in Washington, D.C. before the end of the year. And finally, at some point in 2022, the final leg of this conference, at least for this initial phase, will be held somewhere outside of the United States within the Western Hemisphere. Thank you so much today for joining us, and I look forward to not only participating in the conference, but into learning from our great leaders. Thank you.
Mr. Innis, thank you so much for providing us with the backdrop for the TALC conference. and providing us also with some insights relative to the importance of having this most timely discussion. But we want to get right into the heart of our program. And with that, we would like to bring Senator María Fernanda Cabal. She has done so much to help bring all of the parties participating in this conference today together. She and her staff have done invaluable work to make sure that we are able to discuss these topics and move them forward into actionable items. So with that, I would like to turn the floor over to Senator María Fernanda Cabal. Senator.
Hello to everybody. Thanks for the invitation to this first talk meeting. Thanks to Mr. Aaron Manaigo and Niger Innis. I'm glad to share this opportunity along with some other representatives from Latin America. Let me start talking about Colombia. And I can truly tell you that I have never lived these stressing times before. I kindly ask you to put the video, please.
I'm sorry, were we able to cue that video, or are we having a few technical difficulties on the back room?
Okay, if you just want to upload it after I finish, it's perfect. Okay, there
it's playing.
Oh, here we go. Can we get that cued from the top? Is that possible, or?
It got frozen. However,
Okay.
if you just, here is one of the policemen burned. What I did is to cut different pieces of videos to share all of them together, just for seconds. This is if you see it, we have in Colombia what is called centers of immediate attention from the police. So the new way of attacking police is burning the place where they are, you know, in their service, during their service. If you want, I go ahead with the presentation, but you make sure that the video gets in the right time, okay?
We will.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. This is a fourth generation war. Colombia has a history of violence since its birth as a nation. Apparently, this is not new for us, but it is really different. During the 19th century, we lived a permanent civil war, and during the 20th century, communism arrived into our land. There were 4 terrorist groups: ELN, born in 1963, FARC and EPL, born in 1964, and M19, born in 1974. There were other few ones, not as important, and the ones that I have stated. They played the role of internationalization of communism. In other words, displacements, murder, kidnapping Colombian people became usual. In the 80s, the Cali cartel and Pablo Escobar scared the entire country in the midst of the drug war. In 2002, we had the highest number of murders, 30,000 people killed per year. Our economy was completely destroyed with 16% of unemployment. Remember, 2002. The GDP per capita was around $2,400. At that time, arrived President Uribe, and his first goal was democratic security back to citizens, especially in rural areas, controlled by the guerrillas, who at that time were fighting against the army and also the paramilitary groups. President Uribe was sure that if he gets security back, because Colombia was suffering 3,000 kidnapping people per year, he could push the economy forward. And then that funds could be available for social programs. With these three goals, first, security, second, moving the economy because people could again start to work and produce, and the money from the economy moving will then be shared with the poor in the social programs. He rescued the country. GDP in 2010, when he left power, was 3 times as when he got into the presidency. ELN group was almost defeated. FARC group descend from 26,000 to 4,000 members, and EPL groups disappeared from the scenario. Then President Santos came into power, and he decided to sign a peace agreement. He took almost 4 years of dialogues in Havana, Cuba, with the terrorist group. Despite that, Cuba has been, in the long Colombian history of violence, one of the biggest promoters. Cuba trained guerrilla, it is proven, since the 70s, especially with M19 group. The Santos government banned the spray of cocaine crops with glyphosate. What happened then? During the peace accord, Santos did not allow the army to fight all these coke plant crops. So they had 7 years moving ahead with their business with a lot of money. It's amazing how Colombia turned to be the first cocaine producer, rising to 300,000 hectares, never seen before. But during that peace accord, he spread in the world that he was doing the best for the peace of Colombia. And he was awarded for it. He received the Nobel Peace Prize. What nobody knows is that that Nobel had another business behind, which is giving the exploration of the oil reserves in a part of the Caribbean to the Norwegian company, that is a state company. Despite the fact that the Colombian people said no to that peace accord, to what was written there, and we won the plebiscite, Santos did not care, and he introduced the peace accord through Congress, violating the popular will. And with the help of all these international human rights organizations, nobody cared what the people of Colombia decided at that time. Additionally, many witnesses sentenced on corruption in the well-known case related with the Brazilian company Odebrecht, a scandal who spread throughout Latin America, revealed how President Santos stole in 2014 the elections against Zuluaga, who was our candidate. Then in 2018, President Duque won the presidential elections against a former guerrilla member of the M19 movement, Gustavo Petro. Gustavo Petro has been a very well-alumned, a very well, as I can say, advanced student from Hugo Chavez from Venezuela. There are pictures that you could see them since the 80s together. Gustavo Petro belonged to a group that in 1985 burned the courthouse with the magistrate inside. This was a Holocaust of the Palace of Justice at that time. Since the election day, when Duque won, Gustavo Petro announced that there would be permanent mobilizations in the streets, anticipating the protests that raised months later. In November 2019, this experiment of a fourth generation warfare started. Organized protests arise with violent vandalism against police stations. 72 police stations vandalized, 50 burned, more than 200 buses of public transportation burned, 68 bus rapid transit stations destroyed. Suddenly, this warfare stopped because of COVID pandemic. Colombia's economy was growing 5.5% before COVID. Unemployment was around 12%, but the country was growing at that time. After COVID, because we need to be accurate with the numbers and with the situation, after COVID, our economy decreased in 6.8%, and unemployment raised to 17%, more than in 2002 when President Uribe arrived into presidency. So it means that we got back about 14 years in the, or more, 18 years back in the growing of our economy. 4 weeks ago, a strike was announced by leftist union leaders with the excuse of a tax reform announced by President Duque. 1 year before elections. So what we see now, again, as 2019, is a series of organized violent protests, along with the destruction of, again, more than 200 buses vandalized. Look at this, how they have been moving on. More than 160 ambulances, with the fateful result of the death of 2 newborn babies. These people act completely crazy. It's a combination of ways of fight. These people think that they are allowed to do everything because of the right to protest. They are telling the world that Duque's government is like the Maduro's dictatorship, and that the action of the police are criminal actions. They are comparing the actions of the police, that currently we have more than 1,050 policemen injured and 4 policemen dead, because the new way of fighting is stopping the ambulances, let the people die, and burning the police, as you see in the video. More than ATMs, 400 ATMs and bank office burned, and they are doing everything to stop the economy. They block streets, highways throughout the country. They kidnap people in their own neighborhood. They are stressing everyone, and they are doing a very clever way of fighting. They put different people paid mostly around in some 100 places. And afterwards, when they do that, they do violent actions, and they film them and they reproduce them through the internet So they get the people in Colombia to change the perception of what is really happening, which is a violent attack, but they reproduce it 10,000 times as it is. And we identified, and the authorities identified, more than 7,000 accounts from other countries, especially from Russia. And we have to say that we had to cancel some Russian diplomats' presence in Colombia because they were apparently spying here, as we did also with the person from Cuba. So when you see how they affect medical supplies, gasoline, food, what they're doing is like a process of balkanization of Colombia, a process of kidnapping, of dividing, and pushing us to feel that there's no one that can help us and save us, and moving the people as being in a civil war. So they are also lacking the supply of all the elements to clean the water in the biggest cities. And to end, let me tell you, I'm from Cali, which is the third biggest city in Colombia. Cali is in the southwest, near Ecuador. Cali is located geographically in the Pacific, 2 hours from the Pacific, where all the cocaine goes out to the US and all the arms, the weapons and the money gets in. Cali is inside of the Cauca Valley state. It's one of the most productive states, and we have a port in Buenaventura. We have an apparent strike when it's a very well-planned terrorist attack funded by mafias. We have a month of being blocked. Cali has no supplies at all. Tell me if this is a pacific protest, as they are selling the world through the leftist parties, through Gustavo Petro and his allies, who are flying to the United States to tell the US congressmen to defund our police, to cut all the ways of help that we have and had before as allies. All this is a perfect fourth generation war, asymmetric war, planned since before, that are executed now because they think that this is the moment and this planification comes from outside. They are doing it in Latin America, and if Colombia falls, unfortunately, it will be difficult for the rest of the countries to survive. Thank you very much.
Well, Senator, you have certainly given us a lot to digest with that well thought out and provoking outline of the current situation in Colombia. And we're going to get into that in a short while. But next, we would like to invite Mr. Eduardo Bolsonaro to join us with comments. Mr. Bolsonaro joins us as one of the most popular political figures in Brazil, according to the records from the last election. He received the most votes, if this is accurate, than any lawmaker in Brazil's history. As a member of the Chamber of Deputies, and he's held that position since 2015. He chairs the International Affairs and National Defense Committees, respectively. He is a lawyer by training, a former police officer, so he is a man that respects and knows and loves the law. And we ask him to provide comments today on the status of Brazil's economy and how Brazil's economy is impacting the nation as well as its regional partners. Mr. Bolsonaro, we turn the floor over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Manaigo. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for the opportunity to talk in English for you. And first of all, I have to go back a little bit only to explain the scenario here in Brazil, how we got the country. And for sure, I'm not part of the government, but as I'm the son of the president, I have to tell us something about it. So the election in Brazil that elected President Jair Bolsonaro was 2018. At that time, we were coming from impeachment of the Labour Party president, Dilma Rousseff, in 2016, and her vice president, Michel Temer, had a little bit less than 2 years in the office. So when we got the country, we had around 13 million employed people here in Brazil. And we were suffering here with an economic, political, and moral crisis. Only to have one example, we have here in Brazil a public company called Petrobras, which is our public company for oil. Yes, here in Brazil, when you extract oil from the sea or from the land, you only can do that with this public company. We changed it a little bit. Nowadays, you have foreign companies here in Brazil, but at that time, yes, we had only one company. And the Labour Party, they had so much corruption during the government that they even give damage to this public company in a scandal called Petrolão in Portuguese. And in this corruption scandal, they stole around $10 billion at least in 4 years, from 2014 until 2018. And this was the way that our former president, Dilma Rousseff, from the Labour Party, I mean, extreme left, this was the way that she bought the Congress to approve everything that she sent to the Congress. And only to give one other example, as before me was talking here, the Senator María Fernanda Cabal from Colombia. We had here in Brazil a refinery that was announced in 2009 called Abreu y Lima. Was kind of a joint venture between former President Lula and former President Hugo Chavez from Venezuela, which would provide us with 50% of the oil that this refinery would suppose to refine. And in 2009, they announced an investment of $500 million. And after 5 years to build this refinery in the northeast of Brazil, it was in an amount of almost $3 billion. Yes, they don't have no ethic when you talk about stole people's money. So this was the scenario of Brazil. A lot of corruption scandals, political, economic, and moral crisis. And then became Jair Bolsonaro, talking everything that the people would love to talk. But the politicians, as you know, usually following the politically correct, they would never talk about it. But President Bolsonaro was together with the people and got elected, not spending even $1 million in his campaign, something that was just unbelievable. But okay, then we start our government in 2019, and our budget was almost 100% committed. I mean, almost 100% of our GDP was out of control of the government. It was supposed to pay the salary of the public administration and all of those accounts. So what we made first, we focused in the social security reform. And after almost 1 year, we got it. we saved the economy of Brazil, approving a social security reform that was proposed from our economy minister, a liberal, Paulo Guedes, who got graduated in the Chicago University. And thanks God, we have this brilliant man here in Brazil. And also trying to improve the tourism here in Brazil, we also improved the security of the people. How? I will tell you two examples. First one, we made flexibilizations to people have access to firearms. Still nowadays, it's very expensive to a Brazilian to buy a gun because of the requirements of the law. But the new decrees of President Jair Bolsonaro at least is giving chance to the people to buy a gun. And in the first year, we saw the selling of guns going up 84%, and the crimes as murders going down around 20%. Yes, you didn't listen wrong. 20% down with the murders, with less gun control. This is the biggest drop of this kind of number since 1980, when we began to do this misery. And also, we made debureaucratizations as not required anymore for people from US, Canada, Japan, and Australia. When they are coming to Brazil with the proposal of tourism, is not required anymore to have a Brazilian visa. You can come free, only using your passports. And we are now studying a way that the Americans could come to Brazil only with the driver's license, pretty much copying what is going on in Mexico. Because usually the Americans that are coming to Brazil to do the tourism, they do not think in live illegally here in Brazil. People criticize us a little bit. I mean, people, the opposition, left wing, criticize us, asking, where is the reciprocity? But if you look for the numbers, usually Brazilians try to go to US illegally. So that's why US must keep your immigration policies to make sure what kind of people is entering to live in US. Only to give this example. Brazil was doing good, and we end the year of 2019 as the number 4 in the world when you talk about received foreign investments. We were behind only US, China, and Singapore. So it talks a lot also about our program of privatization that I'll talk a little bit better later. But then came the pandemic, and the pandemic was like very hard to Brazil as for the rest of the world. The whole world is looking negative GDPs, with the exception of China. But in the beginning of the pandemic, the numbers in Brazil, the economic numbers, they were suggesting that Brazil would see a drop of 10% of your GDP. And when we end the year of 2020, we saw a drop of only 4.1%. Much better than other developed countries as Spain, that got 11% down with your GDP. UK, 9.9% down. France, 8.2%. Canada, 5.4% down with the GDP. Germany, 5%. Japan, 4.8%. And Brazil, only 4.1%. Brazil is one of the very few countries that even got better numbers for poverty during the pandemic. And we made here a program that helped a lot the Brazilians, especially the poor, and especially those that we say here are the invisibles, that are those kinds of people that don't have a social security number. They don't have even an ID card. But we found these people, a little bit more than 2 or 3 million people that there really no any kind of register or any kind of a number inside of the government banks. So we give to the people in the beginning a little bit, around $120 monthly to they get this kind of payment, because this is informal workers that don't have a way to survive with so much lockdowns that we were facing here in Brazil. In the beginning of the pandemic, our Supreme Court decided that the president doesn't have any kind of power to decide what would be open or closed during the pandemic. Lockdown policies here in Brazil, it was something up to the governors and the mayors. And they got a kind of competition, trying to see who is the governor or the mayor that will lock down more your city or your state. As you can see in the United States and some other countries, pandemic here also became a political problem, not a health problem. And they tried to desperate it to impeach the president Bolsonaro. But as the president has still nowadays a huge support of the people that went to the streets, even during pandemic, that's true, to don't let other politicians and establishment fall down with the president. The establishment here in Brazil didn't have the chance to fall down and to impeach President Jair Bolsonaro. And it's very funny because they criticize us because, oh, during the pandemic, you were doing protests. But the mainstream media, they don't have the same behavior when you talk about Black Lives Matter or left-wing manifestations, because they are really smaller than our protests. If you go to the YouTube now and take a look about the size and the numbers of the motorcycles that was together with the president in Brasilia and in Rio de Janeiro, you're going to see what I'm talking about. Going a little bit forward, we received compliments from the World Bank about the economic policies of Brazil, because our tariff reductions, we had more than 600 products that got a lower federal taxes during the pandemic, and sometimes even 0% tariff. Unhappily, unfortunately, some governors, as the governor of São Paulo, João Dória, they increased the taxes of some products. And people is looking for that. That's why President Jair Bolsonaro has a really strong support from the people. Also, the World Bank talked good things about Brazil when you talk about trade facilitation and also customs agility. And as well, we received compliments from the International Monetary Fund that in December said that Brazilian government answered for the pandemic really fast and substantial. So in economy, we are doing really, really good during the pandemic. And to finish, when I talk about the pandemic last year, following the financial market, the economy minister for the third time this year estimates an improvement for our GDP that nowadays for this year, we expect 3.5% of increase of our GDP here in Brazil, which is a very good number. And as now in the Congress this year, we just approved the conditions for the privatization of the Eletrobras, which it is the biggest energy company of Latin America, and we are going to privatize that. And also our public company for mailing, calling Correios, which has more than 300,000 employees. We are also going to privatize this company. We are showing to the financial market and to the people the way that we want to follow, to reduce the size of the state. If tomorrow, if a left-wing president like Lula that stole Brazil as much as possible, if he come back to Brazil, he will have less conditions to steal people's money. And to be honest, I don't think he will return so soon. Then, so our economy is recovering. Nowadays in Congress, we are analyzing privatizations, the administration reform, The tax reform is in debate in the Congress, and also other very important suggestion, that is the auditable vote. Here in Brazil, we use electronic ballot box, and we have to trust in our system. But if you take a look around the world, the hackers, they go into all of kind of systems. Why not? They couldn't go inside of our electronic ballot box. So what we are going to approve in Congress is this auditable vote. So we are going to have a printer to print the vote together with the electronic vote. So we will have a way to recount the votes. So it's not be necessary anymore to the people to trust in our system, in our electronic system. This is very, very important, even more after what happened in US during the elections. That is up to US for sure. This is not up to me in my position to analyze what happened in US, but everybody in the world saw that the problems that you have in US. So to finish it, Mr. Manaigo, thanking again the opportunity to talk with you, I have to tell you that, yes, we have a very stressful life here in Brazil. Yes, every day we have to disarm a bomb. We are fighting against a very strong establishment after 30 years of socialists in power. But this is the only way that we have to keep with normal life, because the other option that we have is go down with your head and follow what this kind of people draw to your life. So my advice for everybody is we have to stand as much as possible. Who stands more will win this war. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your comments and in your outline of the current state of affairs from an economic and health perspective in Brazil. And we're going to look forward to getting into more of a robust discussion with you and back and forth and get into some more of the details of the points that you made and allow you to elaborate on some of those points. Our next presenter for this morning is Dr. Paul Murray. Dr. Murray has been an ordained minister since 1992. And in 2017, he was elevated and consecrated to the title of bishop. Bishop Murray serves on the College of Bishops as an executive board member of One Way Churches International, and he currently serves as vice president of the Global Peace Foundation and leads the effort impacting religious liberties. Dr. Murray, we look forward to your comments, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone. You know, as we look at this conversation that we're having today, I can assume when one listens to such a gathering of leaders who are speaking about national and regional security, economy, and trade, how is it and why is freedom of religion introduced as a part of this discussion? So please allow me to kind of lay a foundation here. Religious freedom, like every human right, is universal. Religious freedom is a human right, and there really should be no delineation between the two. They both are intertwined together. And all people everywhere are entitled to it, no matter where they live, what they believe, or what they don't believe. Religious freedom cannot be fully realized unless it is understood as a human right. And when governments violate those people's rights to believe in and worship freely, it really jeopardizes every other human right. Now, I'd like for you to consider this interesting fact. Religious freedom has a direct impact on economic growth. religious liberty, along with economic freedom, draws on and it really encourages similar traits. We've just heard from some of our esteemed presenters today talking about national security and discussing the economy and the power that it has. There is data on economic liberty and religious freedom, which demonstrates how religiously free societies encourage entrepreneurs whose new enterprises benefit themselves, their companies, their employees, shareholders, consumers, stakeholders, and really the entire community. So in other words, religiously free societies usually display the highest concentration of companies that generate prosperity and broad development. But when you look at closed religious systems, they are that have a foul economic development. Closed economic systems are unkind or worse to religious sentiment and practice. Open systems in both areas are necessary to really sustain human flourishing. Therefore, if we desire more economic freedom and prosperity, then we should have a strategy to promote religious liberty and religious freedom. If we want growing economic growth and development, we need to respect and promote the rights of individuals to exercise their religious beliefs and to permit religious groups to follow those beliefs. Competition for religious activity creates really healthy conditions for economic competition and activity. Now, Latin America, and here we're talking about the United States, North America, and looking at Latin America. Latin America is recognized as a predominantly Christian region. Open Doors states that Christians are the most persecuted religion in the world and are at near genocide levels. Christianity is at risk of disappearing in some of the world, and evidence shows not only the geographic spread of anti-Christian persecution, but also its increasing severity. I want you to understand that more than 340 million Christians suffer high levels of persecution and discrimination just for following their religion. That's 1 in 8 believers worldwide. Now, let me bring it closer to home. That is 1 in every 12 believers in Latin America. And please allow me to share with you some additional facts before I move into some of the solutions here. But here are some of the additional facts here. When we look outside of Egypt, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria, China, we can point to all of those countries and really identify and calculate how the impact of persecution against all forms of religion. But I want to speak predominantly to the United States and Latin America. Within the United States, we are seeing a level of disengagement within the public square when it comes to religious liberties. We have challenges and the court systems that are violating our First Amendment rights in the United States, which is the freedom of religion. We have individuals that have lost their jobs because of the fact that they are practicing their religion. There are some that have been removed from positions because of their speaking on their biblical or even on the Torah or the Quran when it comes to their convictions and what they hold to. And because they speak to that within their own community, when they step outside and have an employment position that is found out that they feel this way or demonstrate their lives that way, they have lost their employment as a result of that. We are seeing really the erosion of our First Amendment, our religious freedoms throughout the United States, challenge after challenge. So as I speak to Latin America and speak about the United States, we're pretty much on an equal playing field here when it comes to religious persecution and religious prosecution. Those are the two things that are taking place. I've traveled to Cuba, where there is an ongoing effort to crack down on religion. Government authorities have beaten pastors and lay workers. They are dragging politically dissident women away from their Sunday services. They are enforcing arbitrary detentions, church closures and demolitions. In Colombia, to our dear brothers over and sisters there, a largely Christian country, persecution is localized and it's violent. Church leaders are threatened, harassed, extorted, and even murdered as a result of the violence perpetrated by guerrillas and other criminal groups, especially in the country's more remote areas. In Venezuela, just a couple of months ago, there were at least 4 Christian men who suffered serious injuries after they were stabbed, forced to eat pages of the Bible, and they had crosses etched into their skin. And so this is why we have this conversation connecting all of these pieces together. Because to understand what people of faith are facing today, we need to understand and see that it's not just an issue that is impacted somewhere in China, for example, with the Uyghurs, or in Nigeria with the Christians, where it just seems so far away, but even neighborly, neighbor to neighbor, country to country, we're seeing these kinds of persecutions and prosecutions. I serve as vice chair for the International Religious Freedom Secretariat. And within this forum, we have really been fortunate to create a platform that brings people of all faiths together to discuss the kinds of issues that are impacting their communities of faith within the public square. In addition to that, we connect with civil society, with government, to introduce these issues and to promote a partnership in addressing such issues. And I believe that when we look at exactly what is going on around the world today, that an International Religious Freedom Roundtable is critical to bring forward a sustainability of common goods, or common people coming together and saying, hey, this is great. We need to address these issues. One of the words that we don't use when we talk about religious freedom within the Earth Roundtable of movement is tolerance, because this is not about tolerating one religion or another, but basically it is a holistic approach that brings all faith communities together, because we must be engaged together in the public square, because that's where we all interact. And when we see a minority religious group, or we see even a major religious group that is dealing with persecution or prosecution, then this collective voice comes together to speak to that. So within the International Religious Freedom Roundtables, this convening of civil society that comes together, it's an opt-in where people speak where they're at, and we develop letters that are written to government that have helped in the United States to even pass legislation to protect religious freedoms or minority groups, both internationally and domestically. And those letters that are drafted and introduced are their opt-in letters, which means that anyone that's a part of the Religious Freedom Roundtable can sign on a letter or state that they do not want to. And that is a result, and that piece there is really important, because as an opt-in, people can come in and speak to what is important to them and their community, but yet still be there in support for others. And I think when we think of these kinds of things, that it's important that the collective voice really does have power, and it does have influence. And when I'm looking at how economy and how we look at national security and all of these other issues that are taking place around us, the question comes up, well, what do we do here? And I know in my travels, I just arrived back last night from Guatemala. I was in Guatemala and Costa Rica, and working and setting up these roundtables. And I know that in Latin America, there's really not a strong attention paid to this issue of religious freedom, and how does it connect with all other areas of the community. And it's challenging at times when we look at this, because you don't hear in the Latin American news that there's persecution or people being prosecuted. And this can be frustrating for those that are dealing with it and not being able to be heard about the issues. You know, when we look at this advancing of moving information together, that folks want to see the state to be mother, father, and teacher. Religion wants mothers, fathers, and teachers to teach children and for parents to monitor teachers. The individual and the family are the core of a free society. And when I look at this, I said that anti-religious attitude is mostly not visible in Latin America. It's under the surface and is really coming if we permit collectivism and lawlessness to continue advancing. We who love liberty, regardless of our field, we must recognize our mutual struggle, and we need to work together on this plane, because each one of us that are here today and everyone that is listening either is a person of faith or a person of no faith, but we still connect together. And even though our faiths may be different or we have no faith, we still must work together and communicate together. So we have to look at every component of this issue. So when we're looking at religious freedom and the work that we're doing around these roundtables, it's a critical component that brings everyone together again. So you have civil society and government connecting together to address these kinds of issues, which provides economic growth. It provides national security when we're all connected. So there are these lines that connect everyone together. So thank you very much for allowing me to give this short presentation, and I appreciate the time together.
Thank you for that, Dr. Murray, Bishop Murray, and we will circle back to you for our discussion portion and get more into that. There are a couple of tidbits that you shared that I certainly was not aware of, and I'm sure the broader segment of the folks that will watch this who will certainly appreciate your continued insights on these topics and how you're tying economic security, national security into religious security. So thank you for that. We are now going to, after now our three topic headline speakers on national security, the economy, and now religious freedom, now we're going to get into more the regional subject matter. And we are next going to bring Mr. Rafael Valera to the podium to speak. Mr. Valera is a Venezuelan activist, writer, and co-founder of the right-wing political movement Rumbo Libertad. He has written articles for American media outlets like Breitbart, El American, for Brazilian media outlets like Turca Livre, and podcasts, and his writings have been read throughout the Americas. Mr. Valera, we welcome you to make your comments. Obviously, you have 5 minutes to make your comments before we go into Q&A. Mr. Valera, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much to everybody. Just because, thank you so much for having the time to listen to this young Venezuelan guy who remains unknown to the vast majority of the floor. I hope to make this a good experience for you all. I was initially going to talk about terrorism in a very common sense, but rather than talking about these international organizations of interest in the special sense that I had previously thought, I set out to analyze why terrorist organizations are so common and why they have been normalized in the world. But first, I think it is necessary to clarify the basics in terms of the conceptual and the historical senses. We could define terrorism as the asymmetric warfare method par excellence of our times. States have gone from using extensive military corporations and clashing their forces to extinction to financing much smaller militias, but with training and infiltration capabilities that give better results than conventional armies. Although terrorist movements are much older in the Islamic world, in the 1960s, the Soviets adopted South American organized crime as their armed corps through such Major General Jean Sechna. Hence the birth of narco-terrorism as we know it, and terrorist organizations such as FARC and ELN with the help of the Cuban dictatorship. With the demolition of the Berlin Wall, the global revolutionary movement, who is a fundamental ally to the Islamic world, formally adopted this MO to continue the pursuit of its goals and went to establish itself in South America with the help of the Foro de São Paulo, the São Paulo Forum headed by or led by Lula da Silva and Fidel Castro. And 30 years later, we must analyze the results of their actions and their efforts. For example, FARC has seats in the Colombian Congress. Hezbollah has seats in the Lebanese parliament. Hamas has a majority in the Legislative Council of Palestine. The ELN controls more than 40% of Venezuelan territory. Hezbollah controls the northeastern peninsula of Venezuela. So the question is, how did organizations whose foundations are painted with the blood of innocents receive billions from international organizations like Hamas? How they came to be paid with taxpayer money coming from the pockets of the population that they have been killing for decades, like FARC? And how do the governments that protect these genocidal organizations have a seat on the UN Human Rights Council? Perhaps many may feel uncomfortable with this truth, but the power that was once created to inform people of what is happening in their country and the world is the main ally of terrorists and the totalitarian regimes that protect them. A lot of the mainstream media in the world has romanticized the causes of these international criminal organizations with highly sophisticated linguistic uses and narratives. The Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho emphasizes that the war mode of terrorism, that is, asymmetric warfare, should also be called the defeat of the victor, because the states ultimately will always lose the war of truth in the face of terrorism. The case of former President Álvaro Uribe in Colombia is clear. For the world press and many in the Colombian media establishment, he remains an autocrat, while the genocidal FARC continues to be romanticized along with the protests that they are currently articulating in Colombia. With the peace accord a couple of years before, FARC became somehow the dove of peace and Cuba a beacon of peace. Professor Olavo de Carvalho also detects a duality of criteria in favor of terrorism present in mainstream media that design the narratives that the left applies later on, respectively, in several countries. It is no coincidence that the thousands and thousands of rockets launched by Hamas at Israel are seen by a lot of a vast part of the world press as fireworks for an oppressed nation seeking to free itself from the shackles of a supposed millennial despotism. It is also no coincidence that the mainstream media is the same one that praises President Joe Biden, who, by the way, will restore multi-millionaire foreign aid to Palestine. Nor is it by chance that these media outlets are the same ones that hinted that former President Donald Trump should be attacked with drones as they did with Anwar al-Awlaki, the Yemeni American terrorist. The terrorist action itself requires media exploitation, that it's their main goal. And the only reason why these organizations are now supported with taxpayer money, that are now legitimized by the UN, and that are massively supported by show business is because they have been normalized, not by the populations they have killed, that would be nonsense, but through the media, the intellectuals that swarm in journals and TV, and the journalistic class who dedicate themselves to delegitimize all those who dare to react against terrorists and stand up for their countries and their people. Hezbollah, the ELN, the FARC tear Venezuela apart and recruit Venezuelan children, not only because the Maduro regime allows it and funds those actions, but because the world press remains silent about it. Hamas will continue in its attempts to destroy Israel, not only because Israel naturally poses a religious threat to Islam, but because BBC specialists, HBO show hosts like John Oliver, support them in such atrocities and their narratives. Just as it is essential to dismantle these organizations and all their networks of collaborators within political institutions, the same must also be done in the media. If until recently it was learned that tens of thousands of agents of the Chinese Communist Party are within the largest companies, media outlets, and political parties in the world, in the same way there are thousands of agents collaborating with terrorism who delegitimize the exercise of sovereignty, law, and order to benefit those who live to kill anyone who gets in their way. The terrorist cannot be defeated if the one who communicates a bombing of areas where children live calls that resistance, or calls the terrorist a Democrat in resistance, or calls those who defend themselves oppressive fascists. In this sense, I believe the debate on terrorism should focus, considering the recent outrage that the world press has done in favor of Islamic terrorism and the tragic silence on the takeover and balkanization of Venezuelan territory by the hands of terrorists. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom to banalize massacres for the sake of political interests. The subversion of reality should not be a loophole for those who have the responsibility to inform. In fact, responsibility means duty, and duty means accountability and transparency. In a world where information is controlled by a few, and many times has it been distorted, the worry for reality only becomes heavier. For reality lies in the core of freedom of speech, and by protecting the former, the latter will only flourish and prevail. Thank you so much for your time, and yeah, thank you.
Well, Mr. Valera, for the unpack there, and I certainly have been taking copious notes while you were talking, and I'm going to look to follow up on some points that you made. So hopefully, I know your time is limited, but I'm hoping that you can stay over for our Q&A, because there are a few questions that we're going to have based on that well thought out a message that you shared with us this morning.
Sure.
We would like to now turn our attention to a presentation from a former minister, Enrique Dagenhart. Minister Degenhart is not with us live this morning, but as you can all imagine, trying to get this type of group of thought leaders together one day, one time, it can be a Herculean task. And although he is not with us in person, he is certainly with us in spirit and thought. And he thought so much of what we were doing that he prepared a video presentation outlining his position on many of the topics that we are discussing this morning. And certainly he will look to be with us front and center as we move forward. So if we could, let's cue from the top the video, please. Thank you. Are we able to cue that video, or are we having a little technical challenge, and do we need to come back to it, or are we okay here? You want to try to get that cue? Okay. While we're trying to get that cued, why don't we go to our next presenter and then cycle back to the video from Minister Dagenhart. We would like to ask Miss Annalee Stangl from the US to join us as our next speaker and presenter.
Good morning. My name is Annalee Stangl, and I'm head of advocacy at Christian Solidarity Worldwide, an international human rights organization with a focus on freedom of religion or belief for those of all beliefs and none. We work actively on around 25 countries around the world where religious freedom violations are severe, including a number of countries in the Western Hemisphere. When speaking about international religious freedom, Latin America is rarely the first region that comes to mind. However, the truth is that there have been and continue to be violations of religious freedom across the region, some of which are very serious. It is worth noting that this year, the US Commission on International Religious Freedom recommended to the Department of State that 2 Latin American countries, Nicaragua and Cuba, be included on the special watch list for violations of religious freedom. CSW has worked on religious freedom in the region for over 20 years, and during that period, we have monitored and documented serious violations of religious freedom in countries across the region committed by state and non-state actors, and sometimes both, depending on the country. Rule of law, corruption, and high levels of impunity in some countries contribute directly to serious violations of religious freedom. Over the past decade, Latin America, arguably one of the most Catholic regions in the world, actually saw more Catholic priests murdered than any other region globally. The leaders and numbers of priests killed were in Mexico and Colombia. According to the Catholic Multimedia Center, which has been documenting attacks on Catholic church leaders in Mexico since 2000, criminal groups often view priests and lay leaders as promoting a way of life that goes contrary to their objectives in their preaching and ministry. The context is similar in Colombia. Although for various reasons not as well documented, the situation for Protestant leaders in Mexico is similar, and in Colombia is even worse, especially in rural areas with a significant presence of illegal armed groups. In some cases, the criminal groups have prohibited evangelistic work, demanded the active cooperation of church leaders, or attempted to use the church as a front for money laundering or a target for extortion. Church leaders who resist the pressure and stand up to threats are often targeted for assassination or forced displacement. Mexico and Colombia are 2 examples of where widespread criminal violence has had a chilling effect on religious freedom, but similar situations have been documented in El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Argentina. I'll just name a few. In Mexico, however, criminal violence is not the only source of religious freedom violations. Religious intolerance in some states is manifested by local leaders attempting to force all inhabitants to adhere to the majority religion. This results in widespread and egregious violations of religious freedom if the government does not intervene to uphold religious freedom and protect victims. The government rarely takes action, and these situations often escalate to violence, including arbitrary detention, physical assault, and expropriation or destruction of property, and end in mass expulsion and forced displacement. CSW is closely monitoring around 20 cases where minority religious groups currently have no access to water because the local leaders have cut off their access as punishment for not converting to the majority faith. There are similar cases in Colombia within some indigenous communities. I want to conclude now with Cuba, where religious freedom violations are committed directly by the government and have been systematic and egregious for the past 60 years, and they are ongoing. Cuba's approach to religion and religious freedom is comparable to the approach used in Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc until 1990, and to the current situations in China and Vietnam. All religious organizations and their activities come under the direct authority of the Office of Religious Affairs of the Central Committee of the Cuban Communist Party. Religious groups must seek permission from this office for things ranging from the right to own a vehicle to something as simple as expanding a bathroom or repairing a roof. The office, in turn, uses the granting or withholding of these permits to manipulate religious groups. Approvals are granted based on the religious group or religious leaders' level of support for the government and its policies. Church leaders of legally recognized denominations report harassment, discrimination, and threats from government officials as a daily part of their ministry. Religious groups that do not have legal recognition are severely persecuted and threatened with confiscation or destruction of their property. Over the past 5 years, CSW has documented a continuous and sharp rise in religious freedom violations in Cuba. Much of this is rooted in the decades-long government policy of attempting to separate Cubans linked to human rights groups and pro-democracy movements from bodies of faith. In recent years, more and more church leaders have defied this policy and welcomed all Cubans, regardless of their political beliefs, into their churches. This has become a flashpoint for religious freedom violations, perhaps most obviously manifested in the violent, arbitrary detention each weekend of women linked to the Ladies in White movement in order to prevent them from attending Sunday Mass. However, just in the last month, CSW has announced severe violations of religious freedom experienced by members of independent civil society, including journalists like Joel Suarez, an award-winning writer and evangelical Christian, Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara, an artist and leading activist who, while on hunger strike, was blocked from receiving visits for spiritual support by both Catholic and Protestant leaders, and Michael Osorbo, a hip-hop artist who was beaten on the street while Cuban intelligence agents openly watched and recorded it by individuals who apparently were falsely claiming to represent a centuries-old Afro-Cuban secret society, which holds sacred religious beliefs. We have called on the international community to make it clear to the government of Cuba that it must stop its attacks on religious freedom and members of independent civil society. The general global perception that Latin America is a Christian region of the world with strong Western values and not a region where religious freedom is an issue has in fact allowed violations of religious freedom, many of them serious, to continue overlooked and unchecked. Well thought out policies by the international community to promote religious freedom in the region, carried out in consultation and cooperation with civil society on the ground, and while simultaneously holding governments responsible for ensuring that these fundamental rights are protected and upheld, could have potential to make a change. Thank you.
Thank you, Annalee.
Ms. Stangl, thank you so much for that. We are now going to ask Mr. Dardo to please, is that where? Mr. Dardo López-Dolz, who is the former Deputy Vice Minister of the Interior Ministry in Peru. And he's with us this morning, and we're going to ask him to come to the floor to make his 5-minute statement. After which we will move into questions and answers. Mr. Dolz.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I don't know if you hear me.
Loud and clear, sir.
Okay, thank you. Well, there is a lot of things, but I will center in the main problem we have in Peru right now. Is the worst situation in my 200 live country, because it's the first time a terrorist group is close to take the government, not using terrorists, but disguising them as a political force. In the 80s, Shining Path, or Sendero Luminoso, was a local terrorist communist Maoist party. Most of its leaders were PhD, so the ideological roots were strong and complex, and also the dogmatism of the behavior, trying to follow a path similar to that followed by Mao. Nowadays, more artisans with low education level, but they are backed by strong forces around the world, something different from the 80s. In the 80s, they were alone. Maybe some of them received some instruction in Cuba, but right now they are receiving support from narco traffic, from local mafia, like Vladimiro Cerrón, who is the owner and the chief, the president of the party of one of these candidates, Pedro Castillo. They have close relation with the supposed to be disbanded FARC. They are pretty close to Evo Morales and the Poncho Rojos from Garcia Linera. They are bonded with BRIC organization. I'm talking about Venezuela, Russia, Iran, China, and Cuba. And there are plenty of Bolivian and Venezuelan operators inside the territory. Venezuela, because they are part of the migration. We have 1.5 million of Venezuelan people refugee in Peru, and from them, the intelligence sources talk about 10,000 operators. And for Bolivia, our border is only painted in the maps. It doesn't exist. You can go to Bolivia and return to Peru without seeing a single officer who asks you who are you and why you are there. There's also help from Podemos España and a big network of bots attacking the image of who wants to stop them. Right now, Shining Pack or Sendero Luminoso is clearly important part of Pedro Castillo candidate party. 5 elected congressmen of Peru Libre are being investigated, and 2 of them are right now being processed as members of terrorist organization. I'm talking about Shining Pack. One of them, Guillermo Bermejo, a member of former Coordinadora Continental Bolivariana, who frequently traveled to Venezuela, Ecuador, Cuba, and Chile, was connected by the police to a plan to kill the US ambassador on 2007 New Year. Usually Peru is not a big concern for other countries out of the region, but if we pay attention to the copper production, which Chile is close to fall because they won the majority of the new constitution Congress, and Chile produced 34% of the copper. We are the second. We produce 8%, and China 7%. If we add 34 plus 8 plus 7, it is almost half of the world production of copper that will be in hands of the Chinese or China or Chinese-backed parties. There is another reason to be concerned about Peru. It's Shanghai port. Will be the first Chinese port in South America. It's been built by the Chinese, and will be capable to receive ships, commercial or military, with a depth of 20 meters. So there is no another port with this capability and bonded to China interests in the area. We have also no usual suspects. Martin Vizcarra, who was a president before he was impeached, was a low-rank member of Chavist Coordinadora Continental Bolivariana. After an acute political war, he destroyed all the opposition parties. He put in jail almost all the leaders, and one of them committed suicide to avoid being detained. But suppose to do this, you need to be smart and be prepared. But he failed in the combat of COVID-19 and of the pandemic, placing us in the worst position. I don't believe it. I don't believe it's a fail. It looks like if you are enough smart to destroy all your enemies, all your adversaries, and to obtain the power and keep it, you can be fool enough to put your government in the worst position. It looks like it was part of a strategy to weaken the economical support of our society, and also the power of political and businessmen organization, plus our poor population in this desperate condition that will make they ask for what we usually know as a savior, something who will save them. His government prohibited private import of masks to cover faces. Molecular exams, only the government could do it, and vaccines. And end buying overpriced, not recognized, Sinopharm vaccines without really bad results. There is a second non-usual suspect, the actual president, Francisco Sagasti, who doesn't hide his sympathy and familiarity with MRTA terrorists when they kidnap a lot of people in the Japan embassy a decade ago. And according to Navy intelligence source, he was, before that, a non-official speaker of MRTA in Great Britain and in France. That's the reason why the leader of this task force that commit this massive kidnap showed respect to Mr. Sagasti from the very first day. At the end of his kidnap, he asked for a signature from the leader of the group. 2 days ago, terrorists killed 18 people, including 2 women and 2 children, in the Ryan, the area where is the most important coca growing and cocaine production in the country. But the President Sagasti avoided to talk strong about it, and he and some members of the press also, all the leftist party are talking about this, avoiding say terrorists, avoiding say communists, avoiding say left terrorist group. And in the case of President Sagasti, who likes to speak in TV for whatever he wants, almost anytime, he avoids to talk about it. He and the Minister of Defense only speak to say, don't use this with electoral, as an electoral tool. So the Minister of Defense, who has to be worried about the problem, is not worried about the problem, it's worried about the electoral use of this communist terrorist attack. And it's funny because they are in the government, because they use they did political use of the death of 2 young students in the protest against former President Merino. That's the reason why they are there. Also, there is Iran back in that. Today in Peru 21, they published something that is already known, that Edward Quiroga Vargas, the leader of Inkar Islam, an Islamic political group backed by Iran, that has been present in any single important riot or violent riot in the last decade. Is part of the inner circle of Pedro Castillo and is pretty close to Shining Path. Cuba also is present because Vladimir Cerrón, the president of Peru Libre, and he's the real chief and the real owner of the party. He's a doctor, a medical doctor educated in Cuba, with sentenced several times for corruption. That's the reason why he's not the candidate. He can't apply. He can try to be in any party position because he is avoided by the law. And his brother is now the chief of the economical issues in Castillo's team. So we are facing 2 scenarios. One, if Pedro Castillo wins, I'm afraid we will have an accelerated Chavez process because the people who's around here, because the region is an actual scenario different one than the one that have in the past Hugo Chavez, and because we don't have the oil that have Venezuela to allow them to do it slowly. The other scenario, if it wins Keiko Fujimori, they announced they will cry fraud, and they are preparing to mobilize these organizations to do roadblocks, riots, invasion of of farms, and we expect riots like those that Antifa did before in Chile and US, trying to repeat what they do to Evo Morales, did to Goñi Sánchez de Lozada in Bolivia in the past. Remember, Evo didn't win the election. He pushed Goñi Sánchez de Lozada to a position that he has to quit, and then he was elected by a vast majority, something that led him be recognized around the world as a president. Well, the reason of that is longer than the time we have here. In the beginning is we as a country never invest resources in the fight from the very beginning of this. If you remember Yuri Bezmenov's presentations in US TV in the 80s, he speak about a method he called ideological subversion. And this is what they have been doing in Peru for decades. They take control. First, they took control of the union of teachers. So they are teaching what they want to teach, and they avoid teaching what they want to avoid. They want to avoid to teach to our students. We are talking about 3 or 4 decades. They are also infiltrate early the Catholic Church. So now they are bishops. We have bishops who work for this group. They take control of all major, most important universities in Peru. So what we have new generations of professionals who will become to be judges, prosecutors, journalists, or even CEOs, young CEOs of new companies, who think in the way they show them how to think, who know what they only want them to know. So the battle is long. I think we will have to do first a propaganda fight. I don't know if we are on time. And then we have to begin a long-term effort to recover the truth and the freedom. Freedom is not free, as you read it in this famous wall in DC, but the price is climbing in Peru and in the region. Thank you.
No, thank you, Minister Dolz, for that very sobering analysis as things relate to Peru. I believe that we have gone through our final series of speakers, and we are going to go directly into our Q&A discussion. As I mentioned at the onset, while this is not a debate amongst ourselves, we would like for all of our panelists to engage one another, as I'm sure there were insightful tidbits that you may want to ask questions or gain further clarity from your fellow panelists. So please, by all means, while myself as the moderator and Mr. Innis as the host do have a series of prepared questions that we would like to go through with you, we certainly would want each of you to engage one another should the situation present itself or you feel the need to do so. So with that, I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative, and I'm going to toss it over to our esteemed host, Mr. Niger Innis, and allow him to ask the first question to begin our Q&A session. Mr. Innis?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manaigo. I was moved by several presentations that were made today, but I'm curious, Deputy Vice Minister Dolz, what the Shining Path, can you tell me what the Shining Path has to do with, or connect, if you will, the Shining Path with the Venezuelan plan for 21st century socialism? I understand there is a connection there.
Yes, thank you. There is a strong connection, a clear connection. First, the president and the owner of the party, Vladimir, showed himself with first with Hugo Chavez, then with Maduro, several times as a member of first the Coordinadora Continental Bolivariana, and then as a member of Asamblea de los Pueblos, and in several meetings together. Second, he speaks saying Maduro government is not a dictatorship. He says it's a democracy. And also Pedro Castillo, the president, avoid to condemn the situation in Venezuela and said he's very close to him. Also, there is a more important than Maduro to our country is the Evo Morales, because it's closer, because we are similar
From
culture.
Bolivia,
From Bolivia, yes. Because we have a border that, as I said, is only painted in the maps. It doesn't exist at all. Because it's military, because we are, the southern Peru, Andes in Peru are more similar to northern Bolivian culture. They are pretty close. The family moved to one side to the other. But so Bolivia is the Bolivian operators acting under the orders of Morales, but closely connected with Maduro, are present in every single riot in the last 10 years or more. Even if we check the news in the last month, there have been detected several high groups of arms, of weapons. More than 1,000 weapons have been seized, and we are talking about new weapons, or new Taurus pistol from Brazil, several M1 carbine from the old times, several AR-15, several M16, several Uzis. So there is a lot of guns. There's not a single criminal band in Peru with the size to need that amount of weapons. And when in two of these police operations, they capture Bolivian people with the guns. So there's a good reason to be afraid of a series of violent incidents in the next month, because they only found some weapons in Peru, in Lima, but we're talking about only Lima. If they found around 1,000 of weapons in Lima, they could be 10,000 more weapons around the country, not discovered by police. I don't know if I answered that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. Thank you, Minister Dolz. I want to turn our next question to Mr. Bolsonaro. Mr. Bolsonaro, Brazil, by most accounts, is now one of the world's largest net exporters of grain, soybeans, beef, oil, and iron ore. I mean, this is significant. Under current President Bolsonaro, your GDP per capita has even now surpassed Mexico, according to many economists. What do you attribute this economic growth in Brazil to, sir?
First thing is because here in Brazil, we conserve a lot our forests. So, for example, 61% of the Brazilian territory is Amazon forest. So we have a very small piece of land. For only to give you an idea, we only use 90% of Brazil is used for agriculture, and 11% of our territory is for cows, for meat. And we have around 13% of Brazil with Indian reserves territories. What I mean is, we have a very small piece of land to produce our products. So it was necessary to Brazil bring a lot of technology. And since the 70s, when was created a company here called Embrapa, we started to invest a lot in technology for agriculture. That's why nowadays we have this kind of leadership. And what Bolsonaro government is doing is improving our infrastructure with getting back again projects for railways, improving our roads, and some other things with the ports, airports, concessions, privatizations. So our farmers, they have the technology, and the government is helping with new free trade agreements and infrastructure. That's why we are growing up with our agriculture, and even more during the pandemic. Because if you look, for example, the soybeans is a material that is used for some other kind of products. And everybody in the world, you can change a lot of your policies, but there is one thing that you can change, is because in the end of the day, people have to feed itself. So I think this is the key that Brazil is enjoying these opportunities.
I see here, Mr. Bolsonaro, that the World Bank economists are predicting that Brazil's economy is supposed to grow by 9.9% year on year for this second quarter. Do those figures, do you agree with those figures? I mean, that's significant growth, sir.
Yes, I have to be very careful, very conservative when you talk about these numbers, because if you tell that Brazil is going to grow, I don't know, X%, and we do not target this target, people they will start to think that we are lying. And this is pretty much common when you talk about people in public positions trying to say that your country is healthy, your country is doing good. So I'm very happy. I confess that I'm very optimistic about our numbers, because Brazil was growing up in a very solid way. In 2019, in the first year of Bolsonaro government, we started to grow up a little bit more than 1%. You may think that this is not that much, but this is very solid, because we are growing up with not with credit as we were used in the past. In the past, during the Labour Party government with Lula and Dilma, they had credit to everybody. And when you have this artificial growing, someday, sooner or later, the account comes. And it came in 2015, after the re-election of President Dilma Rousseff. So after that, Brazil saw, for example, in a couple of months, we saw for 3 times the price of the electric account growing up. You know what I mean? That we are having a very solid growing, and I really expect this number are going to be realized as soon as possible, for sure.
Thank you for that that clarification, sir. I want to turn my attention to Mr. Valera, and during your statements, and I was taking notes as I mentioned, and I want to make sure that I have this correct. You mentioned in your comments that terrorist and criminal organizations operating in our region, in some instances, were being supported by taxpayer money. Did I get that correct? And if so, what did you mean by that, sir? Could you clarify that point for us?
Of course. Well, it's simple. For example, FARC, the revolutionary narco guerrilla that has been operating in Colombia since the decade of the 1960s and later on became basically protected by the Venezuelan communist regime. They are now in the Colombian Congress. So they have seats in the Colombian Congress, and who's paying for the salaries of the elected officials? Well, taxpayer money. And where does that taxpayer money come from? From the pockets of the people. And while they are pushing the revolutionary agenda at the Colombian Congress, their armed corps that it's called, like, they call themselves the dissidents of those who are now sitting in the Colombian Congress, but they are basically the same. They are, while they are at Congress speaking and pushing their revolutionary agenda, they are also killing and killing innocent people in Venezuela, in Venezuelan territory, and in Colombian territory. They're articulating the protests that are currently ongoing in Colombia, and they're engaging in drug trafficking. So these guerrillas, they are in Congress, they are elected officials, while they are killing innocent people and taking money from their pockets.
Can I add something?
You also, let me follow that up. Yeah, please, Mr. Bolsonaro. Yes.
Only to give one example,
Go right ahead,
we had here during the Labour Party government, I mean Lula and Dilma, we had a group called Foro de São Paulo. It's a group that, where you had the leaders and the presidents of most part of South America in the last years. For example, Evo Morales from Bolivia, Correa from Ecuador, Lula and Dilma from Brazil, Kirchner from Argentina, and for sure, Chavez and Maduro from Venezuela, and Raul Castro from Cuba. And only to give one example, our public bank called BNDES, supposed to be the public bank for development of and social issues from Brazil, we get the money of this bank, which in the end of the day is people's money, and sent to Cuba to build a port. Cuba, as you know, they produce a little bit of sugar and tobacco in the maximum. They do that. So there is no reason for we build a port in Cuba that would be economically healthy for Brazilians. And what kind of control that you have in Cuba? And also, we build with the money of this public bank a metro, a subway in Caracas. So all of this, in the end of the day, is money for FARC, for ALN. So this is a clear example where you have people, the taxpayer from Brazil, giving money by the presidents, corruption presidents, to other countries only to help the revolution.
Mr. Valera, I want to come back to you, sir, if I might. You also make comments about, terrorism in the hemisphere, and even in some instances globally, being romanticized. And you mentioned that you think Hollywood might be culpable here for putting out movies or books or TV shows that's romanticizing terrorism. I really need you to expound on that, please.
Sure. I have several examples. One of the most recent, for example, is a movie made by about Carlos Marighella, who was a radical left Brazilian terrorist who really killed a lot of innocent people and formed what was later transformed into the revolutionary armed struggle in Brazil, which are and their members are allies of Lula and Dilma and the party of them and several of other far left parties. But I'm not talking about making movies like that. I'm saying that, for example, actors like Mark Ruffalo, they are accusing Israel of genocide. We have another, for example, a Vogue
You're
model.
referring to Mark Ruffalo from the Avengers. Is that you're
Yeah.
referring to Mark Ruffalo who plays in the Avengers? Okay.
Yeah. And also you have, I've read that a Vogue model said we shouldn't criticize anti-Semitic comments in this recent Israeli Palestinian conflict. She said that anti-Semitic comments are not to be criticized and they should be in fact encouraged. So you have and to add more on that, you have, for example, the New York Times, you have an article that made Israel look like the bad guy and Hamas, not the Palestinian innocent people that might have got hurt during this conflict, but Hamas explicitly, they made Hamas look like the underdogs and the Israeli army and the Israeli people like the bad guys.
Bishop Murray, I want to come around to you and again, thank you for tying together economic terrorism and violent terrorists and how that all relates and can equate to religious terrorism as well. Most recently, there were articles and reports that dozens of religious leaders, I believe in Colombia, were gunned down by nefarious characters. What message were they attempting to send with this heinous action, sir?
I'm not very familiar with the specific details to that, but I will say that the issue that we're dealing with is, unfortunately, sometimes when you look at the political dynamics of a country and you have these groups that are wanting to control specific avenues of commerce, that when you have religious leaders that are standing there calling upon moral principles and really living by that and challenging leadership from top to bottom about that you step in between or you step in the line of fire to those that are focused on power control and economy, having that money for themselves. And so therefore you have those kinds of issues that take place. I think when we look at it, and really I want to bring it to the perspective of not so much the terrorism piece, but the healthiness of our economies, and that when there is that platform for religious freedom, that it allows people to operate with those convictions and to uphold to specific standards that are demonstrated through their acts and their deeds. And then as a result, the community is emboldened and blessed by that. You know, in the United States years ago, when it was being really growing in its early years, the first thing that was established in any new town was the church. And then everything was built and centered around the church. And I think what has happened over time is that there have been other priorities that have taken precedent. And now when you have individuals or religious groups that stand up and say to a government leader that that is wrong what you're doing, it puts them in that line of fire because they are challenging the authenticity, the integrity of an individual, a government, or a group. And as a result of that, the attacks come back. Also, just to kind of wrap that up and make another point, is that governments often understand that when they can restrict people's individual rights, then they get to control the narrative. When we speak to religious freedom as it being a human right, and governments try to stop that or encroach upon that or restrict that, they are really violating the very core principle of humanity. And that's the reason why it is so necessary to have this kind of conversation when it comes to economy, national security, that religious freedom needs to be part of that conversation. Thank you. Turn it back to you.
Thank you for that, Bishop. Thank you, Bishop. Minister Dolz, in a little over a week, Peruvians will choose between leftist Pedro Castillo, who is a school teacher by training, and right-wing Keiko Fujimori, who is the daughter of jailed ex-president Alberto Fujimori. Peru is one of the richest countries in the world in terms of natural resources. How do you think a new government should leverage the resources of the country to improve the country and its citizens?
First, let me briefly end the answer to the previous question. There have been also several leaders of Movadef, the legal arm of Sendero Luminoso, which I impact, who travel frequently to Venezuela to receive orders from Maduro, and there are also other leaders who went to meet to the Cristián Palomino, the leaders in Brian, then went to Venezuela and then returned to meet with Cristián Palomino to transmit the orders. But now to answer the second question, I think what we need to do is to make another step in the use of what we produce. For example, copper. As I said, we are the second in the world in the production of copper, but we only sell copper and sometimes other products from copper, but we don't produce in large scales copper in the final product, like cables or other things. These are about copper, zinc, and other mineral products. Also, we have to take care of a better care of our wood resources. They are being depleted because the illegal timber is deforesting the Amazon. We have to avoid more strongly. Also, we have one of the most varied zoological amount of species in our country. There are several things that could be done to protect it. For example, I'm a hunter. I try to lead an effort to manage some of these species. It means many people invest money, not from the state money, not from the taxes, private investment, to manage some species, to produce the money, to protect these and other species. But until now, I can find a legal response that let it do it. Then we have problem. We used to be the first fisher in the world in the 60s and the beginning of the first years of the 70s. But our sea has been depleted by first were Cuban, then when Chinese fishing boats. So we have to avoid that, to recover the fish production availability of our country. We are in a very good position because the Humboldt cold current that make our sea pretty rich. Then there's also a lot of cultural products. We have many more places than Mexico, but we are not putting them in value. So, for example, everybody in the world knows about the Machu Picchu. Almost nobody knows about the other places. Some of them as important as Machu Picchu, but not developed with not enough hotels around and facilities to tourists to arrive. This is something that could produce incomes, taxes, and will avoid some people stay in a poor state. If we recently, I sent a paper to a Spanish university about the different process in the country. We see we were growing fast since 1992 to 2011. Then we began to decline in the group in the growth, and also there is a change in the view that people think our process. So what I think we need is to first take another step, not only be producers of raw material, we have to produce some middle or end market products. Second, we have to take care of our cultural treasures to make it profitable. Third, we have to take a more professional and intelligent approach to our natural resources to make those resources produce money enough to keep them growing and not retreating like now is happening.
Thank you, Minister Dolz. If Mr. Bolsonaro is still with us, this is our last question for the session, and then Mr. Innis will tie this all together and then conclude the formal discussions for the day. I'm not sure if Mr. Bolsonaro is still there with us.
Yes, I am.
Last question of the day. Okay, great. Mr. Bolsonaro, I think we can say with some degree of accuracy that Brazil is now the straw that stirs the drink, at least economically, in the region. But you do have some private sector leaders outside of Brazil that are concerned. And their concerns are the complex tax system in Brazil, some of the excessive regulations that are there, particularly in the business industry. How do you look to manage these two things to attract foreign direct investment that is really the linchpin to unleashing the economic might of any country?
Yes, you are right. We are still a country that we have a lot of regulations. What we are doing is reduce these regulations, but it takes time. In the under the president's capacity, especially in the economy ministry, they are doing a very good job. But some of the things, I mean, the biggest part of the work, it must be made by the Congress. So it takes time. We are now pushing forward in the Congress the administration reform, which talks about the public employees, but also the tax reform. We want to reduce the number of the taxes that we have in Brazil. But this is a big debate, because when a representative or a senator, when he's going to vote this kind of issue, some of them take a look if the taxes for the state governments, if they're going to reduce. Some of the representatives, they are connected with mayors. So they look for what kind of benefits the mayor they will have during this kind of reform. So this is a big debate, and it is very hard because our tax system is in our constitution. It's, in my opinion, it would never be there, but it is. So it's necessary 3/5 of the votes of the members of the Congress. I mean, the representatives and the senators to approve a substantial change in our tax system. But I hope that we are going to see some change. It will not be perfect, but the tax reform, I think, have everything to be done until the end of the year.
Do you think this is impeding innovation in Brazil right now, sir?
Yes, because we have other, when you talk about it, we are competing with some other countries. For example, if you have an investor that he has the chance to invest in technology whenever in the world, we are competing against South Korea, Japan, Singapore, US, China, and some other countries. So we have to be in the same level. As I said, nowadays we are still in a very hard situation, but the good news is that we are going in a good way to reduce our regulations. And for sure, after that, we are supposed to receive more investments in Brazil. For example, in 2019, when I was chairman of the Foreign Affairs and National Defense Committee, after 20 years, we approved, after 20 years of debate, when President Bolsonaro and former President Trump, when they signed an agreement that would let Brazil to launch satellites and rockets to the space. In the same year, we approved in my committee in the Congress that Brazil is going to be in these very, very high level countries that are the countries that have the chance to launch rockets with satellites to the space. So it means that we are going to receive billions and billions of dollars, and for sure, part of that it will for the development of new technologies here in Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. Bolsonaro. Mr. Valera, any final comments and thoughts, sir?
Well, I believe that I should reaffirm or ratify my message in terms of we should always preserve freedom of speech and protect what it's basically the foundations of reality, which are facts, and that should be the main core of our struggle, because by protecting freedom of speech, we're protecting reality, and reality will prevail, and the enemies of reality and facts and decency will of course lose the struggle. That would be my main final comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valera. Mr. Innis, would you wrap us up for this morning's talks? And I turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Aaron. Today has been a fascinating education and quite inspiring. My friends have communicated to me that our government, meaning the United States government, I believe out of the Vice President's office, has just authorized our embassies around the world to fly the BLM, Black Lives Matter flag outside of their embassies. This is significant and important to all of our friends in this hemisphere, because you should know that socialists, their friends, and their lackeys are using the Black American experience and history to promote socialism. That is the bottom line. And it looks pretty innocent to have the BLM flag flying. But I think of the gross hypocrisy that would exist hypothetically if we still even have an embassy or consulate in Cuba that would fly the Black Lives Matter flag while the very government of Cuba, as Annalise Stangl referenced, is oppressing an Afro-Cuban organization that is trying to exercise their freedom of religion, their freedom of thought. Very, very sad, very ironic, and a bitter, disgusting hypocrisy. But to end on a positive note, this has been an extraordinary conference today. I want to thank all the participants. And I also want to thank, a lot of times you forget the the folk who really make things happen, which is the staff. And so I want to thank, and the staff is an international staff or hemispheric staff and support team. I want to thank Kellen Felix. I want to thank Juan David out of Senator Cabal's office. I want to thank Steve Heck for his support in this effort, and many, many, many others throughout North America, the Caribbean, and Latin America. And I want to welcome you all. Thank you all for listening today. And I want to welcome you all to part 2 of this conference, which will be held in Washington, D.C. before the end of the year, and part 3 that will be held outside of the United States, but in the Western Hemisphere. Thank you, Mr. Manaigo, for your very good and very strong moderating. And I anxiously look forward to seeing you all in person in Washington. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that will conclude our forum for today. God bless and Godspeed.
Godspeed.